This will be fun.
Here's the deal. Last year, this is perhaps overly Yankee colloquial to say here's the deal, but last year we did our first panel on human rights. Now, Rebecca Villalobos, who is here, was involved in that. At that time, we made a commitment that we would separate out and focus on this topic differently, clearly, every year. So, this is the first time we're honoring the commitment because this is next year. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to show you a reason why this is so critical. So this is today's New York Times. And since I'm American, I can talk about America. Trump officials said AIDS relief funded abortions. This is false. So when we talk about traceability, transparency, honesty, integrity, human rights, whatever system we're using, at the end of the day, who is affected, what is right, and how do we go forward? I cannot think of two better people to have this conversation than Brad Brooks-Rubin and Estelle Levin-Nally. And Brad, we've been, I'm going to say we're going to call him family, and very honored to have him with us as the years go by. This is Estelle's first time as participating in the conference. I'm truly thrilled, and honestly, I think, again, we recommit, but the floor is theirs.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I promise you I won't say what I said yesterday that I won't repeat.
I guess, the challenge is to me to try to take it even to a different place? Is that the idea? Yeah. People are, they're tired of hearing us, so we've got to come up with something interesting.
We've got to make it fruity or frothy.
Yeah, indeed.
So we're going to open with just a little 101 on human rights and why should you care and what does it mean as a business to respect human rights. And I love that Rebecca gave us a little push and plug for the UN GPs in the last panel. So you're going to be listening to me for a little bit, and then we're going to move to some scenarios. And we want to just kind of open it to the floor and say, what would you do? As a jeweler or someone in the jewelry value chain, if this issue was in front of you, what would you do? And I know that there are some people in the audience who have human rights degrees or are human rights due diligence experts. And so really, we want you as our allies to support our community to make sense of these dilemmas and to work through them. So that's the plan.
Yeah. Can I just say 2 words on this? No. Damn. All right. Well, never mind. So when Lisa was asked me a few weeks ago about this panel and saying it was challenging to put it together, my suggestion was, why don't we just let's open up with scenarios. Let's just, on a reflection of we are 15, 20, 25 years into various initiatives, various schemes, various approaches to dealing with due diligence in this industry and frankly many other industries, and I don't think anybody could look around and say, well, great, we've done it. Human rights are in a much better place in 2025 than they were when we started this. It's not to say there's not a lot of great programming and a lot of great efforts. There are a lot of great positive examples, but we are still really at the beginning stage in an industry, especially like jewelry, that's been around for thousands of years. We're in the first 20 of trying to figure out human rights impacts. And we're not doing it great, in my opinion, as you've heard me say yesterday. So this is about actually figuring that out together a little bit. How do we, here's a scenario. These are scenarios. Estelle's going to give the 101 of what you should have in your head. And there are a lot of scenarios that you all face every day, and I think, unfortunately, companies face every day, and they look at it and they're like, huh, all right. And then they move on. And the decision making is still, I'm going to just keep doing the business I'm doing and not actually really open the hood up and say, what are we doing and how can we do this differently? So that's the goal.
Thank you. And in the interest of fulfilling my human right to food, If there's anyone that would like to grab me a coffee, I would be so grateful. Sorry.
I will do that.
Thank you, dear friends. So does that make us family now? Okay, so this is just a little 101. Can you see can people see the PowerPoint, please? Oh, I keep do you know what I'm going to do? I'm gonna do this. Sorry.
Wow. Now you're going to.
That's
Never
where
mind.
Yes, we're stopping there. Okay, so very briefly, we are going to go through these things. I'm going to give you a brief history of human rights conventions and which ones are relevant to business and why. We're going to talk about the relationship between human rights and business. We're going to talk about, well, how well are we doing on fulfilling human rights globally? So that kind of helps build the case for why we need to keep working on this. And then we're going to go kind of specifically into what does it mean for many of you as jewelry value chain operators to support the fulfillment of human rights and to discharge your responsibility to respect human rights. And I should add that I would not call myself a human rights expert. I'm a strong human rights advocate. I've had various responsibilities and roles in human rights over the years, and I'm still learning too. And I just want to say that with humility because we're all starting somewhere. And this is a really, really important issue, and it's a very powerful issue, and some of the most impactful work in artisan small-scale mining has been when it's been human rights-led, in my experience. So, since the 1940s, there are over 70 human rights conventions and treaties around the world. Some of them are global in scope, some of them are regional or national. There are 9 core conventions. And there are some that are specific to certain issues around health or indigenous peoples or whatever. What you see here is the International Bill of Human Rights, 1948. And then to the right of it is the Convention on the Rights of the Child, something that is very personally important to me because I have a point of view that if we were to seek to focus our efforts along value chains to support the fulfillment of the rights of the child, we would inevitably fulfill the human rights of everyone, and they are the most vulnerable and dependent. And I always get a bit emotional when I talk about it because of my kids. At the top there is a map that shows you the countries that have ratified the International Convention, which one is it? On the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And you'll note that there's a yellow country that hasn't done that. So I just wanted to point that out since we're here. My darling, thank you so much. So, when you're a business, in the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, there's an expectation to respect the internationally recognized conventions on human rights. And what you see on the right is that list. So first the International Bill, then the core set of ILO conventions, understood as the fundamental principles and rights at work. And then there are some additional ones that are specific to vulnerable groups. Rebecca mentioned some of them. And the latest one is the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which is, has been passed at the UN, but it's still progressing in implementation. Now, it's very important to say that you cannot separate human rights from nature. We cannot fulfill human rights if we don't prioritize, the protection of the environment. And that's because the environment provides a range of functions to human welfare and well-being. Ecosystem services, clean air, clean water. It supports the resilience of communities by helping health and better livelihoods and so on. And then another really important aspect through which human rights and nature interfaces, and one that those of us that work in mining are familiar with, is concepts around resource management and equitable access and use and benefit from resources, but also equitable exposure to the harms created by degrading environments. And I just think it's really important at that point to say we are in a planetary situation where we are in perpetually degrading nature. And I don't have a slide to show that, but maintaining the status quo to do no harm is no longer enough in relation to nature, and this is why there's this massive push for regeneration of nature through the work that we do. So they have this dialectic that a healthy and biodiverse environment will support human well-being and the fulfillment of human rights. But equally, we need strong social systems and human rights fulfillment to enable us to protect the environment. So what has this got to do with business? Well, I mentioned some of the conventions, and those are written for governments. But over the years, what's happened is those conventions have then been translated into other global norms through which human rights can be fulfilled by business. And the major frameworks are up here. There are more. On the top are kind of the global Bible of things that we support our clients to conform to and to bring to life. The OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. Human rights is one chapter within that. To fulfill the human rights piece, you do the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. We have the IFC performance standards that are used pretty much as standard in investment, but also in mine sites. And then we have the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, which the UN Global Compact permits businesses to implement and bring to life. And then according to your salient risks or your priority stakeholder categories, you may seek to implement one of the issue-specific guidances. So on Indigenous people's rights, or the Child Rights and Mining Toolkit, and so on. And the OECD Minerals Guidance that people have been talking about for a long time, and are frankly a little bit sick of, is one of those issue-specific guidances. Sorry, I'm being a bit facetious, but I am slightly sick of it. That's fine, and it all sits up there as a set of voluntary frameworks that stakeholders may encourage or expect you to do. But actually, what we are seeing globally is a move to mandate business to implement these frameworks. And these are just a little taster of some of the laws that are coming into effect. Now, some of these are to do with disclosures. Some of these are to do with supply chain relationships. Some of them are to do with sanctions and other things, so that they work through different ways. And it's exciting. Places like Brazil and Indonesia now have sustainability disclosure expectations for companies listing on their stock exchanges. So this isn't just a Western or Northern phenomenon. Also China is implementing these things into law too. So it is really important that when we are really worried about compliance, that businesses are aware that these things are there, but also coming. And it may not be that within your operating jurisdiction there is a mandatory expectation to do it, but there may be for some of your business partners. And that can be to your advantage because it can give you confidence that they are managing their risks, or it can be a challenge because they're asking things of you that you're not ready to deliver on because in your jurisdiction it's not required. But besides that compliance-based push, there's a whole bunch of reasons why implementing human rights due diligence can build long-term value for businesses. And this is the point I was trying to make yesterday. This isn't just a cost and a pain in the ass, though it can feel like this. If you see it as an opportunity, you can capture additional value from the implementation of human rights due diligence. And can I be clear, when I say human rights due diligence, I mean environmental and human rights due diligence, because the two go together. So it helps you be compliance ready based on the prior screen. It can make you more attractive to investors or to secure preferential terms with banks or investors. It helps you manage and reduce your liabilities because you're controlling risk better, you understand your risks better so you can respond to them. It can make you more competitive. This was one of the reasons why in the jewelry world 20 years ago, when we first began talking about sustainability, certain businesses saw it as a competitive market creating advantage to be more sustainable and to start to do these things. And so on and so forth. So how are we doing? Well, actually, there is some really good news. We have been making good progress in closing the gender pay gap in some countries, though that is slowing, and in some jurisdictions where we have seen big political shifts. The global homicide rate has been decreasing. I think we really should celebrate that. Under 5 mortality rates are falling. That is also wonderful. And there has been a noticeable backlash against women's rights. Partly perhaps because of the pace of improvements that we've been seeing. But we are seeing certain nations, and in this case it was a global recommitment, to speed action on gender equality. I can give you a window in on that later if anyone's interested, because I'm an advisor to the G7 on gender equality, and this year's deliberations were very interesting to see what type of concepts around gender equality could be acceptable to all nations, whereas in the past it just would have been absolutely fine, but it's quite different now. The bad news is, in thinking about the prior panel, and thank you so much to all of you for situating this, is that we are in a destabilizing world that is in polycrisis, and I'll tell you a bit about what that means in a second. And that polycrisis is making human rights fulfillment harder. We have persistent environmental degradation. We have rapidly changing geopolitical, economic, and social landscape. These things feed into each other. And whereas, personally, I could feel such progress as a leader of a business in this space until a few years ago, and now it's quite depressing. And many people that we know and love are directly impacted by these shifts, and their lives are being changed as a result of it. And underneath that, the big humanity changes around the energy and digital transitions, and these are accelerating this in certain ways. And that means that human rights risks are intensifying. They're more likely, and when they occur, they are probably going to be more severe, particularly for people that are in communities more impacted by climate change, or where these geopolitical shifts are removing their social protections or social welfare things and so on. And so in the business setting, that means that violations and abuses are more likely to happen. So you do need to be more on top of it. This is the depressing slide. We have an extractive economy, it is destabilizing Earth systems, and the situation is worsening over time. If you're not familiar with the Brooks-Rubin Institute's planetary boundaries concept, I really encourage you to learn about it. It's a very useful way of understanding Earth systems thresholds and how we are at 7 out of 11, and that situation has been worsening over time. And beyond those thresholds, it means that we're moving into unknown territory in terms of potentially permanent shifts in how those Earth systems and cycles work. So that's a bit depressing. Fish populations are collapsing. We are facing extreme water stress in many countries. Forest fires are getting worse. Scotland was on fire a month ago. And not just because of the grouse. And these greater physical and ecological crises are ultimately, therefore, the environment in which we live and generating human rights impacts, but also forcing certain types of political reactions that is affecting our welfare. So, and some of these slides are quite sobering. So globalization is now in retreat. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. There are pros and cons to globalization. Certainly in my geography degrees, they taught us about the cons. And sorry, I can't see what this is. Oh, forget that, it's just a pretty graph, I can't read it. The global conflicts have been doubling. We actually have the highest rate of conflicts globally this year since the Second World War. And some of those conflicts I know that we all think deeply about and care deeply about, and we're connected to. Unfortunately, we are in a situation of de-democratization, and not just in the Sahel, but in other countries. I have to leave today, so yeah, I gotta get through the airport. Oh, sorry, this is to do with migration rates.
We don't stop people leaving.
I know. So, like, here we go, human rights defenders are being killed. Like, I'm sorry. This is the one that blows my mind. Anyway, so in that context, it means that some of the things that we really depend upon and need are pervasive challenges. We've seen progress in some situations, but we are struggling. Access to clean water is increasingly a problem globally. We have undermanaged overconsumption of water. Quality is deteriorating in various places. Think of Accra in Ghana as a result of mercury use. Access and availability of water is inequitable, et cetera, et cetera. And I included some countries here that are just in North America, so that you can get a sense that this isn't, again, just an issue in the global south. It is also an issue locally to where we are today. I'm sorry, this might be depressing, so we'll move on. Gender, the big thing for me, I'm not going to go into each of these because we'll all cry and slit our wrists. So if you just accept the fact that this stuff is tough and it's happening, I don't know if everybody will agree with what I've presented there, because there is progress, but the point is, we are in an urgent situation where we do need to pay attention to human rights, to build a socially sustainable world, but also to build resilient communities in which we live and work, and from the communities where we have business relationships. And implementing human rights due diligence is an opportunity to do that. And the major framework through which you conduct human rights due diligence is the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. And I don't know if last year, Rebecca, you educated people on it a teeny bit, but it provides a set of expectations for governments who have a duty to protect human rights. So really, it primarily sits with governments to ensure human rights are fulfilled. But noting that businesses' decisions and actions can generate human rights harms or increase the likelihood of human rights harms happening because they may make individuals or families more vulnerable, there is a responsibility for businesses to respect human rights through the implementation of human rights due diligence. The third piece is that when human rights harms arise, there is an expectation that victims of harms should be able to access remedy, and that is a really tough nugget. It doesn't happen as standard, and certainly not in a lot of mining nations. And then the piece that's not spoken about here that's really important is actually there's a role for society in the fulfillment of human rights. And that's where civil society, media become really important partners to the other actors here in ensuring that human rights are fulfilled. Now, there are statutory, corporate, and individual pathways to supporting the fulfillment of human rights and driving greater social sustainability as a result. And actually, this is from the World Bank, Rachel and Angelique. You have a program that is, where you support governments to build greater social sustainability. And human rights is one piece of that. But you can see, actually, that human rights, I intentionally put human rights in the middle here, and I don't have time to describe how it connects. But these things are all interlinked. If you invest in good governance, you are supporting the fulfillment of human rights. If you invest in human rights, people are empowered to hold their state accountable, etc. So these things are linked. But the bit that I really want to focus on, just in a little bit of detail, is what does it mean for you as a business to do human rights due diligence? So at very minimum, and this is the difference between responsibility and sustainability in my world. On the left is responsibility. You take the position of do no harm, you manage your risks effectively. You publish a commitment to human rights, you build management systems that help you control your human rights risks. You identify, assess, and prioritize those risks on the basis of their materiality, their salience, how likely are they to happen, how severe are they, should they happen, on the basis of those that are most salient. That's where you put your money and your time. You're not expected to do everything. You then seek to mitigate those risks, to prevent the risks from arising, to minimize them should they arise, and to respond effectively if an incident arises. You then see how well you're doing with your systems. You track effectiveness, and audits are typically used for that, but it's not the only way. You're expected to then be transparent about your commitments, what you've prioritized, what you're doing, and how well you're doing, and how you're changing and improving your systems. That's the reporting piece. And then you're also expected to remedy your harms, your adverse impacts. And the main thing that threads through this, but isn't particularly explicit in the guidances, is the importance of meaningful engagement with rights holders and other stakeholders at each step of the process. And really being a listener and a partner is key to effective human rights due diligence. So this is it in a very simple sense. But on the positive side, when you look to then mitigate the harms or the risks that could be arising, you are looking to use your influence as a business to drive positive impacts. So it's not just to reduce the risk to you, but to reduce the risk for the system and for your stakeholders too. That is when you start to move into sustainability territory, because you're contributing to the advancement of sustainable development by doing that. And there are a number of ways of doing that within your organization, and there are a number of ways of doing that through your business relationships and your partnerships with other stakeholders. Now, in practice, what this means is that you take a risk-based approach to your decisions as to where you allocate your resources for driving change. You commit to continuous improvement. Perfection is the enemy of progress. If you celebrate the transformation and being on the journey and every step that you take, and you celebrate that of your business partners, you are contributing to sustainable development. You recognize it is not an end state, it is a process. You take a mitigation hierarchy approach. For people in environment, that makes sense. So what it means is you seek to prevent first, and then you minimize if you can't prevent, and what you can't minimize, the residual, you offset. You collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. You do not just police and impose, but you work together to solve problems together. You maximize tangible benefits to all stakeholders. I think what Shari was saying earlier was really instructive. And also what you were saying, Jen, about the ancillary co-benefits coming from your Mercury programming. And now looking for ways to think about that co-benefit that you'd not really spent time on, but now you see, can we actually do more on that? That is brilliant work in terms of human rights due diligence and being more sustainable. It's about excellence in grievance management, in having whistleblower channels, in listening to people that are harmed and not just taking a defensive posture, but taking a listening and engagement posture. And it's working in joint ventures is a particularly interesting dilemma, actually, for this. I'm not going to talk about individual pathways, but there's just some core things you can think about as a business owner and as an employer to ensure you're bringing human rights to life. So you're all in jewelry. You're making products that make us all feel fabulous about ourselves. The question on how do you make money is really the question for my professional services friends in Guernsey, who basically just help the wealthiest become wealthier, who are actually the most responsible for climate change impacts in present times, for example. Or for people that might be in vape manufacturing or weapons manufacturing. These are bigger ethical questions, but it is what is the service that your product gives to humanity? And is it a product that supports the fulfillment of human rights, or does it undermine it? Are you doing business with others that don't care about this, and therefore empowering them to get more powerful and influence more people because they're not managing their risks? Or are you choosing to do business with other businesses who share your values and you are also committed? And therefore, you're helping each other become more powerful and having more influence, and therefore, in a kind of catalyzing way, helping the whole system improve. And the last point I really want to point out is, are you, in spite of political shifts and threats, finding ways to stay committed to the issues that you know really matter to your staff and to your communities, like equity, diversity, and inclusion, and to your consumers? So then we're going to come to the fun things. So, Brad, do you want to explain this session, or shall I explain it and then pass to you to...
You're on such a roll. Keep going.
Okay, so a lot of words on here, but really, let me go to the next slide. These are all real case examples that have come from some of our clients or some of our partners that says, the dilemmas that they have had to face and that we've had to help them with. And we've picked 3 that we might dive in today. But there are others on there that if any of you want to look at, we can do that. So I'm not going to read them all out, but I'm going to say this is now when we open up the floor to you. And for those in the room that are human rights experts, I'm going to turn to you in that spirit of collaboration as allies to help us answer some of these questions. But what I would ask, and feel no fear, there is no such thing as a stupid answer. This is about mutual learning. I really want to hear from our jewelry colleagues in the room what you think you should do, because this is about learning. That's what we really want to achieve now. So, Brad, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, and really, I'm just going to, I want to lay the groundwork maybe by being a little provocative as well, because these were framed very well in terms of you. Right, I talked yesterday a couple times about decision making. At the end of the day, this is about, and for those of you that have companies, it's about your company. For those of you who work with companies, it's about the people you're working with. And the starting point for many, I will go on a limb and say in the industry, is often, well, I'm an RJC member, or I'm a member of a certification system, so I'm just going to let them tell me what to do, and that's generally insufficient. So I'm going to start there, and challenge everyone to really think internally about your own company and how, or your supply chain or your value chain, and how you would work. I think certification systems, auditors, that tends to be where industry relies in many cases, and not just the jewelry industry, across the board. I'm going to, and maybe give him a chance to speak to this, but many of you may have seen the LBMA. There was recently an EU report about the LBMA, and the LBMA is the alignment with the EU kind of conflict minerals regulation and broader standards. And the LBMA, I think it was 89%. So in terms of that, the progress and perfection, we can have a debate about where that landed. But the important things that are noted in that report are, there were moments when shadow audits of refiners, they missed talking about these kinds of scenarios. They missed media reporting about these kinds of scenarios, and that wasn't built in either to the refiner's own processes or to the LBMA's work with its refineries. And to be honest, having worked a bit at the RJC, and many of you know I was publicly critical of the RJC during one of these scenarios, because the RJC's version of this was very much if it's not sanctioned, then you're on your own. And so you're on your own. Now it's your turn to sort of respond to this. And I'm happy to talk through any of that in responding, but I think we really want to hear from you all. I can pick on somebody, but I don't really want to do that.
Well, should we start with the first one on risk assessment that we picked out? Do you have it printed so that I can see it?
Of course I don't have it printed. What do you think? I'm prepared?
Okay. So this is a real situation. A client had previously been sourcing from a provenance that at the time they then judged to be too high risk, and they had disengaged, even though it was a really important provenance for them. And they asked us to look at it again and say, should we go back? And so there was obviously a clear set of commercial questions, but they were asking us from an ESG or human rights risk perspective, what would it mean for us to go back? So what would you be looking at if you wanted to answer that question? How do you assess whether the human rights risks in that operating environment and in that country are at a level that you would be comfortable to go back? Any thoughts? And don't be shy, please.
Estelle said there was no stupid answer. There's also no right answer.
Exactly.
There's literally no right answer.
Yes,
right.
Please.
Brave soul in the back. Thank you.
My first question is, when you say provenance, is it in particular a particular supplier? Or I don't know what the context is.
Country. They're considering re-entering a country, and they are, let's just imagine they're looking across different types of producer in the country.
Okay. I guess an official source, reporting source, maybe the UN, depending on the circumstance. International news outlets, because obviously in country might be a different type of propaganda. So.
Yeah, exactly. So you would, please go ahead, Simon.
Well, I'll probably throw the 800-pound gorilla in the room. There probably are people in this room who have worked with companies that are in China. I know I have, and there's reasons you do that. If you happen to work in steel, good luck finding that anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so there's certain reasons you might go into a country, and you always ask your customer, are you comfortable going there? Mm-hmm. And that's always my question to them. And if they're not, then I find other sources, or tell them there really isn't another source. But I think we all have to face the fact that, if we have worked in China, we've all done that knowing that there's the Uyghur situation. So, I'm just kind of saying that I love to be right, and everyone's great, and we're all holy, and we do it the right way. There are times when, like the China situation, it's really difficult to do the right thing and completely avoid the country, because I think if you looked at just about any country, you might find that there are human rights abuses anywhere. Traveling a lot in Asia, I could tell you that any country I go to, just with my own eyes, I see reasons why I wouldn't want to do work in India. I wouldn't want to do work in Thailand, but I do.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that out there, that if it's a very specific situation where the U.S. government has said, hey, no, 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 or if there's a law out there and they're really breaking a law and hurting people, you know, I think you do avoid it, and you have to find a way to find an alternate source. And I'm just saying that as a supply chain guy. Alternate source for me is like part of my lingo.
Yeah.
It's not easy for everybody to find alternate sources, so.
Do you respond? Yeah, sure.
Maybe as the mic is going over,
Are you going to respond to that, or?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's important too often on these, and maybe some comments yesterday were misinterpreted. I mean, human rights due diligence and doing these things isn't about de-risking to find some, you know, and as was said, like, and as you said, there is no perfect source of anything. It's a matter of being honest and making clear decisions about where you're sourcing from. And as Estelle noted, and as others have noted throughout the conference, it's about engagement and progress and working on the ground in places that are hard, but with your eyes open and with a transparent level of reporting, I think. So to me, it's always that first question. But I think hopefully no one takes away the idea that a good answer to human rights due diligence is I'm buying all my stuff from, again, some magical place that doesn't exist, where everything is fine. Go ahead.
Exactly.
So I believe the question was around,
Could we get it back up, please, on the slide?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you've disengaged. So I think a couple of things I would be asking is, ultimately, I think as a business owner, you'd be asking, can I operate in this context in a way that respects human rights?
Yes.
And like, in layperson's terms, like, is anything I'm doing getting in the way of someone enjoying their right to clean water, education, all of these different things? So like, that's the bar. And so I think what's interesting with this is that, you know, political regimes come and go, hopefully. Hopefully they don't stay too long. And then I think the question of risks, well, what risks were they before and what are they now? And so the other thing I would add on is that when we look at the impacts that a company makes from a human rights, from a UNGP's perspective, there's what are you causing directly? What are you contributing to with others? And then what is like linked to your sector, but maybe not specifically, you know, your action. And the difference between those three is pretty important because it determines on what your responsibility is. And so the idea being that if you have things in place or even, you know, strong due diligence, then ultimately maybe something is less your responsibility, or you have different action to take. So I think those are the questions I would be asking as a business.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. So the key thing to think about, building on what Rebecca said, is what is my risk appetite? Am I a company that's comfortable operating in a high-risk setting? Can I carry that risk? And if I can carry it, it's not just about reputational, it's about, do I have the competence to control the risks that I'll face in that high-risk setting? Because I may have a high-risk appetite, but have rubbish procedures, have a bunch of blind spots, and end up making a mistake. So you have to make sure that your risk management procedures match your risk appetite as the basis for judging if you will go into a place. And typically you'd look at the kind of general indicators around human rights risks in the country as a whole, in the sector specifically, and if you have identified a specific territory or mine or refiner, you would look obviously specifically at that enterprise and their own competence for controlling risk given the risks that they face. So there's quite a clear procedure to follow once you understand how to do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about which risks. If we look at gemstones, we're looking at Myanmar or maybe Mozambique. If we're looking at gold, we look at the environmental crimes happening in the Amazon, you know, like the international drug cartels that are laundering money in Latin America and elsewhere, and maybe the Russian involvement. So you think about which risks, to Estelle's point. Is it sanctions, or is it, people behind these mines? And just to that point, I think people often think about risks, and they often think about artisanals, but I want to just kind of unpack that a minute. Oftentimes, in order for large mines to be operational, they have to get in bed with unfortunate people. And so they can be connected to politically difficult folks. And so it's not just artisanals who might have political baggage. And I should say, the artisanal mining environment is very diverse. It can be village women making some side income, just pay for their kids' school fees. And that's who I often work with. It can be criminal elements who are the worst of the worst. So you just have to make sure you understand who your business partners are. Yeah. And you don't have to work with everyone, but you have to understand who you're working with. But my point is, whether it's large or small producers, they might have links to vice presidents of a country. And no matter where it is, whether it's Uganda, for example, I used to live there, or Mozambique or elsewhere. So I just wanted to say which risk is really important, and it's not the usual places that we think about, like Myanmar. It can be Peru or somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yep. As the mic gets to, I think Alan. Oh, okay.
Then we should move to the second.
Then we'll move to the second one.
Oh, maybe you want to say something too.
I was just, up here. Oh, someone back there?
Oh,
okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
And then we want to move on to another one, so we can keep these interventions a bit briefer now, so we can move through the issues.
Hi, sorry, I'll be very brief. I just want to pick up on what Christina just said and put something onto the table that comes from, I think, Estelle's discipline geography and also environmental history about sort of the social metabolism of extractive activities, so that it's not only about specific events or specific kinds of problematic interactions, but it's also about the rate and degree of intensity of extraction. And I think that, one of the things about large-scale mining is, yes, it has the capacity to have certain kinds of environmental controls and a lot of capacity to tell its story, but the whole idea of efficiency and of, extracting as rapidly as possible in order to move on to the next project is in itself, has its own kinds of problems that are very, if we don't think about metabolism and rate and what an environment can sustain, that really gets missed and externalized. The cost of that gets externalized. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think Alan up here. While the mic is moving, just to appreciate that point, just to maybe a quick reflection back to Christina's, is human rights, environmental. We haven't talked that much directly about corruption, and corruption sort of fits in sort of the middle, and there's lots of research and writing on corruption and its effect on human rights and environmental, and corruption to some degree is a human rights issue, but often gets missed in these kinds of conversations, so I think it's important to just put it out there. But all right, speaking of corruption, let me turn to Alan.
You're buy him a beer later.
I love you, Alan. Yeah, it's all right.
Thanks, Brad. I think it's important with these.
Just because you're an expert on it from your investigative days.
I'll take it in that way. Well, I think what Christina said is correct, but I think in these kinds of examples, it's good to actually name examples. So if you had a thing like Sudan, right now, I think somebody who would be engaging with Sudan would be in very dangerous territory. If you're looking at a country like Zimbabwe, for example, which has traditionally been on the blacklist and now is sort of rehabilitating itself and moving, I think you could do a case-by-case study. But the important thing, I think, in these instances is for the company to be, if you're looking at the OECD's 5 steps, I think the fourth one is the one that people have the most difficulty publicly communicating. Yep. Not only that they have the policies, but how the policies are actually implemented. So if you have a enhanced due diligence, what does that look like? So if you are engaging it with a supplier or a source in something like Sudan, like in Zimbabwe, you should be able to actually articulate the steps you've taken to lower that risk. Because I think in many of these CARAs that you're talking about, these conflict-affected and high-risk areas, I think with the exception of Colombia, they're not the entirety of those countries. They're pockets in those countries. So I think it's important to sort of say, yeah, we get material from Zimbabwe, but it's not from this particular high-risk zone, or we've done our due diligence. We can explain it. I think for the public, I think that's a very good way of actually demonstrating that you actually are implementing the policies that you have.
This is, first I'll maybe give you a nod, which I owe you one. I mean, the work that Alan's leading with the LBMA to actually have refineries start to publicly disclose where they're sourcing from. And obviously the World Gold Council has been a part of that. Like, there's a lot of effort around that. And what's that? High-risk suppliers. For exactly that reason, and that transparency, again, for the ability to explain why, and explain engagement, and explain how you got there. And certainly there's a recognition, when I was in government, spent a lot of time trying to ensure that there were ways in which also civil society and other governments understood why that was happening and why that was important, so that there isn't a, oh my God, refinery X is sourcing from Zimbabwe, they're funding, ZANU-PF, and that there's a lot more nuanced conversation. But unless the information is out there, you can't have that conversation. And as the person who helped lead the removal of the Zimbabwe sanctions, not because I think highly of the government, but because it's important, I think that's really a key thing.
Before we move to the next question, can I ask that we move to another point, or not question or comment, but maybe Holly, are you okay with that? Because I'm sure that you still have an opportunity. I think we're short on time, so show of hands. Do you want to talk about rubies, or do you want to talk about remedy? Ruby? Hands up if you want to talk about, Ruby? Okay, and hang up if you want to talk about remedy. Okay, we're going to fit it in. Okay.
Can I try to talk about both?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, because I am a human rights expert, and I think, and I've been practicing human rights law for 25 years, even before the business and human rights angle came into play. And I think that we are in the situation of the prior panel with the environment, where we're talking so technically about systems of due diligence that we've lost what are the harms that we're trying to address to people. And so I'll just try to put very quickly on the table, there's a scale of genocide, of war crimes, of conflict with militaries, achieving a scale of human rights violations that are crimes under international laws, and that's where we start talking about the Burma cases of should I stay or should I go? Should I actually do business with military juntas or regimes where we know that these scale of violations are occurring? And then with all of the conventions, there's the two baskets of human rights. There's the civil and political. So we all have the same dignity, and we all have unalienable rights not to be killed by governments, not to be tortured, to have the right to protest and to assemble. And the second basket are the economic, cultural, and social rights, which I think we forget now. Those were really controversial in the Cold War, and the U.S. was always against it. But now I'm living in Ghana, and I'm advising large-scale miners, and I really believe that there's not, or I've seen, there isn't a good human rights analysis of the situation of mining in Ghana. And if I'm coming in there and doing it, a lot of people are saying, oh, human rights, it's about the military and the police. Are they committing crimes when they're engaging against ASM, who are encroaching on LSM? But actually, it's the waterways and the right to there was one slide that we're missing today. I think the right to the healthy environment. We have a right to health. We have a right to education. And when Kif said it's heat and pollution that is the biggest killer, we can try to train police and military not to engage excessive force, but actually, if it's climate change as the major killer, this is where I'm seeing actually this rights discourse of trying to protect what we all are inherently entitled to, needs to move towards. So, and then just on the you, I mean, I think on your slide is really, these are really great examples for this room, but it's still the you, there are different yous and there, and again, just to underscore that even in the UN guiding principles, which say that the companies and businesses have a shared responsibility with governments, it's the, are you causing, if you're causing, you have to do more. If you're an actual miner and you're in a country and you're causing harm, you have to do more to mitigate that. If you're contributing to it, then you have to do something, but a little bit less, or if you're linked, if you're potentially linked. So I hope that's a way of trying to analyze, the range of questions that were mentioned earlier that you need to ask. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mimi, so helpful.
Good, Holly, did you want to come in still?
I wanted to add the point that a lot of folks in this industry are not necessarily even looking at their own house in terms of this. So I'd just like to say, if you haven't done simple things like a gender pay gap, please do so. Jewelry industry tends to be dominated by women, except for in certain industries like, maybe diamond polishing, but let's also look at ourselves.
Thanks so much, Holly. Look, we're at time, so I'm sorry that we can't go into the other things here, but it sounds like this is a conversation that we need to continue. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to my human rights allies in the room that stepped in to also help us deepen our understanding. You can talk to any of us, I guess, afterwards if you want to think about what it looks like concretely.
Yeah, just to add, first of all, thanks for me to Estelle, because I had the idea and then she did all the work. So as always, much appreciated. And I think it's important, take this slide and do this work. I mean, Holly's point is exactly right. This slide is meant to help do this hypothetical within your team, within your company. And to Mimi's point, you means a lot of things. And I will go back to the Chance the Rapper lyric from yesterday. Sometimes the truth don't rhyme. It is okay if the answers are messy and that you're looking towards improvement on all of these issues. If the answer is actually we're totally fine, then you've probably asked the wrong question, and you've gathered the wrong information, because it's never going to be that. So that's exactly the goal here, and exactly these kinds of questions that everyone has put on the table. So.
Can I just make two final points?
Of course.
I'm so sorry.
Always the last word.
First is building on Holly's point. You must deal with your own house first before you seek to use your influence over others. So it's hypocritical to try and push your suppliers to be perfect if you're not sorting out your own situation, and that's a reputational risk, but it's also just what's expected under human rights due diligence. And I think the other thing is that there's an art to due diligence. This isn't just something that's a technical checklist that is very easy. It does take judgment. And that's where practice, and working with others and getting ideas and collaboration is really important. So don't be intimidated if this looks confusing and complex. It is. But it's also a beautiful way to build trust and deepen your relationships. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.